She sat in silence, hidden beneath layers of fabric and fear, scars buried deep beneath her skin and soul. Every master before had recoiled, avoided her, traded her away like broken cargo. But then a human knelt, quiet, gentle, and reached for her hand. Not with command, but care. "I see you," he whispered, "and you're not broken. You're beautiful." In that moment, her world shifted, and for the first time she didn't flinch. She breathed. She believed. She sat still on the edge of the supply cot, arms wrapped around her middle, as if the fabric of her thin tunic could protect her from the memory of pain. The medbay light buzzed faintly above her, too sterile, too bright for the way her eyes flickered low, afraid to meet anyone's gaze. Her skin, pale mauve with deep undertones of lavender, bore the stories no one asked about. Scars etched like ancient calligraphy along her back, her sides, the underside of her arms where she'd been restrained for too long. No one touched her when they brought her in. The auction crew simply unloaded her like cargo, another failed experiment, another thing too broken to keep. But the human who had bid for her hadn't looked away. He hadn't spoken either, not until he offered her a coat. Not until he knelt beside her, holding it out in both hands, not expecting her to take it. Just offering it anyway. She hadn't spoken a word. Not then. Not yet. Just pulled it over her thin shoulders, fingers trembling over the foreign warmth it offered. That was 3 days ago. Now she sat in his ship's recovery chamber, dressed in soft cotton and silence, trying to understand the man who checked on her without asking for anything in return. He never touched her. Not once. Not when he set down food. Not when he patched up the cuts on her legs with salve and gauze. But he stayed near. Always close enough to be seen, never close enough to frighten. She didn't know his name, not until that morning. "Kalen," he said, setting down a folded blanket beside her on the cot. "That's me. If you ever want to know." She had looked up slowly then, lips parting just a little, eyes wide in quiet disbelief. It wasn't his name that made her breathe harder. It was that he gave it without asking hers in return. Like she was allowed to keep it. Like she still had something that belonged to her. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, too safe. It confused her body, left it waiting for something cruel to come. So she stood barefoot in the hallway, tracing the edge of a control panel she didn't understand, listening to the hum of the ship's engines. And then she heard him, Kalen, behind her, footsteps slow and intentional, stopping well before he got close. "I can't sleep either," he said, voice soft. "It's all right to feel lost. I feel that way most days too." She turned slightly, not fully. Just enough that her profile caught the soft glow of the wall lights. Her face had healed, mostly, but the scars beneath her clothing remained, carved into skin that had never been given the right to heal. He didn't stare. He just leaned against the opposite wall, folding his arms casually across his chest, and waited. "They said no one would ever want me," she said suddenly. Her voice cracked from disuse, quiet and dry. "That if I ever got free, I'd stay that way. Alone." She didn't know why she told him. Maybe it was the way he didn't look shocked. Maybe it was the way his eyes softened without pity. "Then they were wrong," Kalen replied after a pause. "You're not alone now. And you're not unwanted." She looked down at her own arms, her hands, the places where old wounds had fused into ridges and raised lines. "But I'm not what I was. I'm ruined." His breath caught slightly. Not from disbelief, but from heartbreak. "No," he said, stepping forward just once. "You're not ruined. You're here. And every part of you that made it through, that survived, all of that is sacred." Her throat clenched at the word. Sacred. No one had ever called her anything close to that. She tried to hide her reaction, to turn away, but her legs gave a little beneath her, and she stumbled sideways against the wall. Kalen moved instantly, arms out, not to catch her, but to steady without pressure. His hands hovered until she gave the faintest nod, and only then did they touch. One at her elbow, one at her back. Gentle. Reverent. She froze. Not in fear, but because her body didn't know how to accept it. His hands didn't roam, didn't grasp, didn't judge the ruined patches of her skin. They just held, steady, respectful, like she was something living again. Something real. "Is this all right?" he asked. She gave the smallest nod, barely a breath of movement. But it was enough. He helped her sit again, right there in the corridor, where the quiet wrapped around them like a cocoon. She didn't pull away. Not this time. He stayed there with her, not speaking, letting silence fill in the spaces where words would have failed. Eventually, her hand moved, slowly, uncertainly, until her fingers brushed his sleeve. He didn't react, just let her feel the warmth of cotton over muscle, the living proof that he was real. They used to touch me like I was nothing, she whispered. Like I didn't matter. He lowered his head, breath soft against the air between them. Then let this be different, he murmured. Let it mean something now. She looked down at her own lap, at the curve of her thigh, the old brand beneath the edge of her tunic, the scar that used to throb when she remembered what it cost her. But it didn't throb now. It just was. Still. Faded. And no longer alone. In the days that followed, she changed. Slowly. She ate with her hands steady. She asked for her own blanket when she was cold. She began brushing her own hair in the morning, long silvery strands braided softly down her back. Sometimes, when she didn't know he was watching, she'd touch the spot on her arm where he first held her, like a marker of something that began there, the moment that redefined her. One night, she stepped into the observation deck, barefoot and blinking at the stars stretching endlessly through the curved glass. Kalen stood near the railing, arms folded loosely as usual, watching the galaxy turn. She stood beside him, not behind him, not across the room, beside him, shoulder to shoulder. I don't know who I was supposed to be, she said quietly, but I think I'd like to become whoever I want to be now. He looked at her, truly looked, and smiled. Not out of pride, but something deeper, something like peace. Then we'll start there, he said. Together. She nodded, and for the first time in her life, she believed him.